Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. Today I'm joined by Mary Amini, a neurographic coach who helps people access their preverbal experience, express it through drawing, and be able to create movement within the self on a variety of issues. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below and we'll get back to you personally. And finally, you can reserve your place in one of my seminars or purchase any of my mind-body guides, previously known as the PDFs, at www.crushingdoubt.org. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Mary. Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm very excited to talk to you about your work. I know we have a lot of overlap in this. So why don't we just start right at the beginning in terms of what is this work that you do, and just explain it to the audience. How does this work?
Absolutely. Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for having me. It's absolutely my pleasure to be here. So what I work on is something called neurographic art. It is relatively new, but it is a very successful way of us tapping into our subconscious mind through the conscious mind through a very specific process. So it actually looks like fun and games. It actually looks like us just drawing a bunch of squiggly lines and connecting them together, but there's actual science behind how this works, and it's very, very powerful.
So let's start with how'd you even get into this work?
I got into this work accidentally, to be honest. Towards the end of 2019, I was introduced to a group of Russian ladies who were into meditation and the divine feminine and so on and so forth. And I was asked to join them on one session, a meditation session that included this meditative art practice. The first time I experienced it, I had a lot of resistance towards it. It was not fun for me the first time. But then I got hooked because the effects of it were so calming that I wanted to find out more. And so I started to ask them for more sessions and slowly became certified in it. And now I teach it.
So what was the resistance initially? And that's
So
the
the
kind of
biggest
thing yeah, go ahead.
So the biggest resistance comes from the meditative part of this art, which is the rounding of all of the sharp edges we create as we create intersections between lines. It's a tedious process. Most people, when they first start to do it, they have these thoughts of, this is silly, why am I doing this? I can be doing other things. I need to get up and answer that email, or the phone is ringing. Or so the ego will bring up all kinds of resistance to what you're doing because it doesn't understand what's happening, but it understands that something is happening that it doesn't like. And because in this process, we're really removing the ego from the process, this is very much a subconscious process. It feels uncomfortable. So it will give you all kinds of excuses for you to get up and not finish what you're doing.
Right. Sounds a little like meditation. I start meditating and then I'm like, but maybe, what about that thing?
The hardest part of meditation is exactly that, being alone with our thoughts. The beauty of this meditative art is that it gives you an out. You don't need to sit there quietly with your thoughts. You're actually concentrating on finding intersections and rounding them and smoothing, and you're visualizing smoothing out all of the sharp edges in your life. So this has a calming effect on your conscious mind, but even more on your subconscious mind.
Well, that's the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, because as I understand it, this work that you do has a lot of overlap with what I do, because so much of it really comes from what in psychology we call preverbal times where you wouldn't even been able to verbalize it. In the first year of life, we didn't even have words, but we do have emotional experiences, and they are embedded within us, and there's all kinds of ways to unleash them, and this is one of them. So tell us a little bit about the process as you've experienced it with respect to that.
Well, neurographic art involves different kinds of algorithms. So essentially, the idea behind neurographic art is that the page that you're looking at is the pleroma. It is the field of all probability and possibility. And you get to express yourself both as an individual, then at a society level, then as a frequency, then as universal consciousness, all on one field. And because it has all of these layers of awareness, as you're working within your piece of work and piece of art, you actually start to access all these different levels. And Because we are not drawing straight lines, we are not using sharp angles, which are all man-made, you end up having a very organic experience with what happens on your page. And as you start to color your piece of art, you start to see shapes, you start to see symbols that mean something only to your subconscious. So it becomes this method of expressing your emotions with no words. So we're not verbalizing, we're not cerebralizing a somatic experience. We're leaving it in the body, but we're just directing it a different way.
This is making a lot of sense to me. In grad school, we studied something called the Rorschach. You may know it, but you're not creating the art. It's just right there in front of you, but we lay our meaning onto it. We look at something and we lay meaning onto it. This is interactive, though. You are not only laying meaning onto it, but you are creating it. Yeah. And this is fascinating. So I wonder, could you show us some examples?
Absolutely. So this, for example, is a neurographic vision board. This has programming attached to all of these different circles that are here. And it actually is a vision board. Nobody would know what your vision board looks like or what you're planning, but you would know and your subconscious mind would know. I want to show you something that's a release or a catharsis, because that is the process where I take all of my heavy feelings, anger, resentment, regret, all of that, and I put it on as squiggles, as violently as you can. You squiggle on a piece of paper, and this is what comes out in the end. Wow. I didn't draw a heart in the center or two of them intertwined in each other. That was my final fixation. That was the solution to my problem. I was being guided to use anger where I was showing resentment towards somebody else. So wow. This is the kind of thing that your subconscious will speak to you through symbols.
Mary, though, take me back to that same one you just showed. What was it like initially? I mean, how does it start?
See, that's the thing. I wish I had one where you could see. This is why I'm looking for one where I've torn the paper. Here we go. So if you can see the back of this, you see where I've torn this? Do you see my pen mark on the back?
Yep.
So the very original thing was just this part where I tore the paper. And then if you look at the final product, it doesn't.
Okay, so when you start out, you basically just almost scribble something. You're not
violently scribble. No.
Violently. Okay.
Yeah. So the catharsis, the process behind catharsis is that we identify that heavy feeling, then connect to it in your body, and then connect your pen to that feeling in your body. And as you let your pen go on the paper, you're allowing for that emotion to express without words, without sometimes sound. It helps to yell it, to scream it, to express it somehow, but no words.
Yeah.
And then we start harmonizing.
You know what I was thinking? I'm curious if this will ring true to you, but it feels like if you took all the rage of a little kid, all of the things that they had to deal with, and maybe not just rage, sadness, but all of this bottled up stuff, and if they could like punch the world in a way that is visual, that's what 100%. This is.
100%. So what's beautiful about this is it's not just that moment of release and that punch that allows them to put our emotions are energy in motion, right? So when you put physical energy behind it, that expression allows for the alchemy. But that is kind of a frustrated emotion with a violent act. This not only has that violent release, but in the end, because you color it in a way that's pleasant to your eye, you turn something that was heavy and negative and you turn it into something beautiful. And you did all of that, right. Not somebody else. Somebody else didn't make it pretty. Somebody else didn't heal you. Somebody else didn't make you feel better. You do it all by yourself. And you start to recognize, I have control over my emotions. I can change from sadness, regret, depression, apathy to joy, beauty, happiness, enlightenment. This is all within me because I just put them on a piece of paper.
Wow, that is beautiful. Can you, if you're willing to, I wanted to hear about your own personal journey in some of these. Maybe you can take us through a particular drawing and tell something about your journey.
Actually, this is kind of perfect. So this is the very first algorithm I was taught. This is called the lotus of being or flower of life. Either one works. This is one of the ones where we don't start with a squiggle. We actually start with an algorithm that gives us that original flower, and then all the lines that come out is all the other programming and harmonizing.
Mm-hmm.
The very first time that I did this algorithm, my full flower was about that big.
Mm-hmm.
It has taken about 1.5 years for me to get this big. When I first started, actually, let me see if I can find some of my really, really early work to show you the quality of the lines, because your quality of lines changes significantly. When I first started, I was suffering from a lot of anxiety. I was having panic attacks on a regular basis. I was medicated. There we go. This is one of my first releases.
Mm-hmm.
You see how my lines are straight?
Yeah.
The connections are straight. This is not very organic looking. And you can tell how I'm vibrating my lines instead of actually allowing them to flow and make them organic. This requires belief in yourself. This is our expression of I'm controlling my life. And that's where I was trying to control everything I felt, everything I thought. I had made myself overly busy with 2 different jobs so I wouldn't have to face myself and all the trauma I was carrying. And through the process of finding neurographic art, especially through release, I have been able to let go of a lot of memories that have come up for me that were traumas in the past. I've even gone through traditional therapy, talk therapy. I had talked about these feelings or these events, but somehow there was residual things that had stayed in my body. There was a somatic part of these experiences that had never been released. And if it wasn't for this process, I wouldn't have found a way.
Well, and I think this is another area where you and I have a lot of overlap, because I had over 20 years of therapy, and I'm not saying it wasn't useful. There were lots of useful things about it. I gained skills, I gained insights, but most of them were intellectual, and most of them were connected to words. And there were just certain things that I couldn't get to, no matter what, because they were buried in my, I think this is true for you too. They're buried in the body.
Yeah.
Ideographically, you can get it out. The same thing is true for me when I help people to interpret or not even interpret, but to understand what their symptoms are actually saying.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there's a whole process of that can happen with ideographic work.
100%. Yeah, we get to, so as the teacher, I get to observe, especially when this is done in person, I get to observe their body language, the way that they're processing what they're doing. But beyond that, just on the page, the quality of the line, the colors they're using, the images they see themselves, the amount of resistance they show in rounding, it is all diagnostic. And because I have a background in Chinese medicine, so I understand enough about medicine, Western medicine and Eastern medicine, to have different perspectives, I can tell them where some of these things are coming from. And I really believe like there's a lot of work towards PTSD even that shows us that the body keeps the score. It remembers that memory. And until there has been some kind of a somatic release, the body holds the key for you to go back into that moment. So this is why it's so important to do these kinds of somatic healing things that don't have to do with our cerebral process and verbalization. I think it's a different processing system altogether.
It really is. And so, we'll always run into trouble when we are searching for a solution in the wrong area or with the wrong diagnostic picture. And I did find that I needed something that would allow me to get the release of things. And for me, it was about understanding my body and understanding that when I had symptoms, they weren't the enemy. They were a communication. And
it's an alarm system.
Yeah. So, okay, when you're working with people, what are the kinds of things you've seen released through this? And you can talk about what's been released in you as well, but I'm curious what comes out.
What I have found is I have become a lot calmer. I haven't had a single anxiety attack in over 2 years. That's not to say I haven't had stresses, especially during COVID. I went through a process where a business that I had built in 10 years was gone in 90 days. It got disseminated, like it got destroyed. And that was difficult from an emotional perspective, but I had a tool that allowed me to sit in it and allowed me to discover, what am I feeling sad about? What is it that I'm letting go? It helped me let go of that process. And it also allowed me to look at myself and say, where are these feelings coming from? My feelings of inadequacy, my feelings of anxiety, my feelings, where are they coming from? So having this process where, because a neurographic art piece takes about 3 hours to do. The simplest one will take about 3 hours to do. So this is not something where you're sitting for 20 minutes and then your mind can be in other places. You're really concentrating on what you're thinking about. So it has definitely been a way for me to alleviate my own anxiety, my own fears, my own, all of that. And I've seen a lot of people have the courage to face themselves because they start to see that their inner world isn't as scary as they think it is, and that it communicates back to them. I have seen people get messages and solutions to the problems that they started the session with, and that's always empowering.
That really resonates with me, though, the idea that we can come to feel not afraid of ourselves, that we can get to a place where we're like, oh, I actually make sense in ways that we thought we didn't. I mean, it's really interesting. I hadn't even fully articulated it that way to myself a number of years back, but since doing this work, I keep coming to, oh, and it just keeps making more and more sense. And so I kind of have moved into more harmony with me. And
100%.
I can see we do very similar work. I wanted to ask another question about the process of it. Okay, so you start off with this kind of angry scribble. What happens then? What happens next with it?
So the first step is kind of creating something called, there's 3 levels of, so neurographic art has 2 active components essentially. One is neurographic lines, which is what we create the algorithms and the shapes with. And the second process is rounding. And that is the process of taking all the sharp edges and rounding them so that they look like, so if you look in this work of art, there is no intersections that have really sharp edges. They've all been rounded. When we do this, we start to create these things that look like neurons in our own body. So because of that, your brain recognizes that and starts working on creating neural pathways. And because you're getting all of your senses involved, neurons that fire together wire together. So now this thought process that you're doing is creating neural pathways in your brain.
Wow.
So the first process is sitting around and rounding all of these edges in the first thing you created. That's very strong squiggly line. After that, you start creating lines that take it out of your problem, because what you expressed is your personal problem, but we can't solve anything on our own in this world. We'll need society's help. So by creating new lines that now take this algorithm into the rest of the page and spread it out, we're asking for different types of help. As we start to color it, we bring in energy and frequency. So at each level, we are bringing about a different level of personal awareness and also societal awareness as well. So that's essentially the process.
Do you mean you then, so you do the rounding, but then you start extending lines out, like actually out on the page?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
You start to take over the entire page. You don't leave any blank. So if you look at all of my work, there's not a single one where I haven't taken over the entire page, even though that's not how we start.
Right.
So we start with small algorithms in the center, but you always take this out because you want that energy to flow. Every line in neurographic art is a flow of energy, universal energy.
And when you look at each one, do you remember what it is? Like, does it?
Yes.
Okay.
I remember what they are because I have a really good memory, but even if I didn't, usually we go into meditation before we start doing our art. And then we come back and we write minimum of 20 words that have associations with what we're talking about on the back of that same piece of art. Wow. So even if you don't remember what it's about, you can go back and look at, what did I write? What was the intention behind it?
Will you show us one and talk about the meaning of it?
I showed you Lotus of Life. Let me show you. Okay.
I didn't get a good sense of the meaning of it though when you talked
Oh,
about it. We
so
can
the
go back to
Lotus
that if
of
you want.
let's do this one. So this is
Yeah.
the same algorithm, just a different. So now you get to see more than one version of this.
Wow.
I keep doing the same thing over and over. So the Lotus of Life starts with 5 concentric circles, and the point of this lotus is how well can you bloom? How do you allow yourself to bloom as a flower? Do you feel comfortable with the flower you end up drawing? Is it big? Is it small? Does it have a lot of sharp edges? How are you feeling about how you're expressing yourself in the world? Are you comparing yourself to other people and other flowers? So that all becomes part of the meaning of what the lotus of flower of being is. How well do you express yourself as you are?
Wow. That just seems so powerful because I can imagine you looking at these things and just feeling the same vibe from before. And there's one other thing I wanted to say, and then we'll wrap up for today, and then we'll continue talking about all of this because we have a lot of overlap. One of the observations that I have about it is when I see these drawings, they look like the inside of the body to me. They look like if we could zero in on a neuron or something like that. And I've seen pictures. So it's just so interesting to me because it's like we're
That's why it's
drawing-
called neurographic art, because it looks like the neuroconnections in your body. And it's actually working both ways, because it not only looks like the neuroconnections in your body, but if you go really, really macro and you look at cosmic connections between galaxies, they look exactly the same way.
Yeah.
So whether you make it very, very tiny or make it very, very big, we're repeating the same patterns. We're part of the universe.
Would you be willing at some point to sit down with me and do one of these so that I can experience?
I would love to.
Okay, because I want to experience what this is. And, it seems like another way of accessing something. So I'd be fascinated. So, Mary, I want to thank you for joining me, telling me about this work. This is just the beginning of our connection with this, because I know you're doing very similar work, and I know you're doing good work because I know how important it is to unleash these nonverbal elemental parts of ourselves. So keep up the good work, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Okay, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I continue to be completely fascinated when I talk to people who are in related fields, but not ones that I even had that much familiarity with. And I really find that as I talk to them, I'm kind of synchronizing with them. I'm bringing that information in. It's making more and more sense what my own system is even saying. And in this case, I thought it was so important that we talked about the fact that things that happen before we can even speak, we're processing them, and they're buried within the body in some way. So Mary's talking about another way to get access to these, and I can't wait to work with her and see what it's like to do it myself. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and we'll get back to you personally.